and welcome to the Sim Racing Perspectives podcast for Sunday, the 5th of August 2018. I'm your host, Davy Jones, and I'm joined today by Alex from The Extra Mile.
Hey guys, what's up?
And Billy Strange from Billy Strange Racing.
Hello.
Thank you, Billy, for joining. Unfortunately, due to scheduling issues, Mike from Sim Racing 604 could not join us today, but Mike, of course, will be back. And to those listening, we've had a minor hiatus, I guess, of sorts with the summertime and vacations and whatnot. It's been difficult to try and get a show together, but thankfully we're sort of back, if I can put it that way. And when we first started the podcast, we made a note to dedicate an episode to sim racing hardware, so that's what we'll try and cover today. I think it's fair to say that expensive equipment will not make you a better or faster sim racing driver. Indeed, Rudy Van Buren, who won the McLaren World's Fastest Gamer, was using a Logitech G27 with the original pedals. I made note of that when Sean Cole from the Sim Pit interviewed Rudy, I think it was October last year. And we can all agree that the most important thing is to enjoy sim racing and have fun using whatever equipment you have, and indeed whatever equipment you can afford. So what I wanted to do was kind of start and talk about the various sim racing hardware types. We have, for example, on the introductory level, you could say, or the entry level, shall we say, you have the Thrustmaster and Logitech with belt and gear driven wheels. And then you have the slightly consumer, shall I say, or maybe pro level Fanatec, which is also belt driven. I personally find the Fanatec product range a bit confusing. Kind of I know I've heard the terms, but the Club Sport V2, I've never really looked into it. But when I see news reports on new products and reviews, I find the thing a little bit confusing. Although I guess a T500, a T300 TSPC is no more easier to understand. And then sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Go ahead. The Thrustmaster and Fanatic kind of bleed into each other. I think Logitech, kind of the base model, and then Thrustmaster kind of goes from Logitech to Fanatic, and Fanatic kind of goes from Thrustmaster to themselves.
Yes.
So they kind of all trickle into each other, and especially because Thrustmaster and Fanatic have different product ranges.
Yes. And then if you kind of go in a linear fashion from the gear driven to belt driven, then we have the direct drive wheels, which are basically kind of industrial motors where you have a high powered electrical motor and the wheel is connected directly to the drive. So you have the OSW wheels, which is what Jimmy Broadbent has. Jimmy Broadbent has an OSW Midge, is that how you pronounce it, from the Sim Racing Bay. Then you have Acriforce, and then there's the Leo Bodner wheels, which I believe Sean Cole from the Sim Pit is using. And then you have the new Fanatec Podium series, which has recently been announced. And I've been following that and trying to understand what's kind of going on. And it's a little bit confusing. And I looked at it today just to remind myself and to kind of make some notes. You have this wheelbase DD1, and then this wheelbase DD2. And for the Fanatec Podium Series wheelbase DD1, you can pre-order a DD1 now, and this product will also be available to pre-order via auctions, starting from a price of €1 or $1, and then the wheelbase DD2, pre-order your DD2 now. So I know there's been some confusion and some complaints online, but I found the whole concept a bit confusing because many people were waiting to see what Fanatec were going to do. And also you have this Feel VR, which I believe Will from the Sim Racing Paddock has had experience on and has tested. and that was supposed to be the kind of the cheaper alternative, the kind of crowdfunded cheaper alternative. And I looked it up today. There's a bundle you can pre-order on Indiegogo, $599 and plus shipping, and it was originally $899. It's down to $599 for this early bird bundle, so you could kind of invest in it now, but it wouldn't be delivered until February of next year.
I also believe Sean Cole got a test with the Field VR as well.
Oh, did he?
I believe so.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to hear Sean's opinion on that one, because the Field VR is very promising. It's certainly the cheapest, in air quotes, direct drive wheel option out there.
Yes.
But it remains to be seen if they can ship a quality product. But everything I've seen so far, all the previews have been very positive. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's like, so it's $600 for the wheel, the base, and the actual pedals. And when I looked on the Indiegogo store today, they're actually selling them as individual items. But you could get a direct drive driven set, wheel and base and pedals, for $600.
I'm not sure if I'm correct on this one, but I'm relatively sure that the pedals are not included anymore at that price point. But I'm not 100% sure. But last time I checked, because a good buddy of mine is looking into the Field VR wheel. Last time I checked, I think it was around $100 just the wheel.
Yes.
But I'm not certain.
Yeah.
But still, even then, it's a good deal.
And it's an interesting market, because you've had the belt and gear driven, and then you had like the direct drive, which is like this high end kind of industrial motors, and then you had Field VR come in, and now Fanatec's coming in. So the market has kind of widened, hasn't it? So
yeah, and quite suddenly.
That's true.
Relatively speaking, of course. I mean, I kind of feel like direct drive wheels have been pushing into the market, wider market, in the past, I don't know, year maybe. Before that, it was still out of reach for most people. But I'm looking forward to them coming to a price point where more people can afford them. Because, as you said rightfully in the beginning, while they don't make you suddenly an amazing driver, they certainly do have advantage, and they certainly are overall more fun. But I'm looking forward to that point, more people can enjoy that.
And then we'll move on to, if I may, what sim gear we're all currently using. Now, I have a Thrustmaster T300, and I have the Ferrari Integral Racing Wheel Alcantara Edition. It sounds very fancy, and I'm actually on my third T300 base, and I did a video on my issues with that and going through the RMA process. And Billy, you're running a TSPC Racer, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
And you've been running that for how long now?
Almost since it first came out.
Yeah.
Probably maybe a month or so after they came out.
Yeah.
So.
And you're happy with that?
Works great.
Yeah.
I have not had problems with any of the Thrustmaster products that I've used.
Yeah.
I ran a TX for a long time. I've given that one to my brother now, and he's using that. And then I also ran a T300.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm one of the lucky ones that haven't had an issue.
Yeah, you must be. Yeah. I got some Monday selections, I don't know, but I had two fail. I'm on my third one. This one seems okay. And Billy, you were at E3 this year on behalf of Thrustmaster. I know you've talked about this at length, but that was your first E3, wasn't it so?
Yes, that was the first E3 that I've ever been to.
Yeah, and there was the Assetto Corsa Competizione event, and you were there from Thrustmaster. But one question I wanted to ask you was, when you were there, when people were mingling around and coming to take part in the competition, or just in general, was anybody asking you about the hardware? I know the focus was on the competition for Assetto Corsa Competizione, and in its alpha or beta stage. But was anybody asking you about the hardware, or did you see a lot of interest in hardware? I know that Thrustmaster also have, I think they had some aircraft simulator pedals there as well, and I think they're also manufacturing headphones. But what was your experience of the kind of the hardware retail point of view at E3 this year?
Well, I was doing the announcing, so I didn't really get any questions about hardware.
Yeah.
I did see people looking at it. They had like a display set up for like their wheels, and mainly E3 though is, even though it's been opened up to the public, E3 is mainly for companies to get together and, make deals to sell product.
Yes.
So all that kind of stuff is, they have their own, they have their own internal meeting rooms typically, and then they'll invite outside vendors. In this case, Thrustmaster, they would talk to vendors in that room, and that's where all the hardware, like all the wheelbases and on the flight stick side, all of the big stuff was in those rooms, and that's where they would talk. I didn't have any interactions with anybody asking about anything except the motion rig itself that was being used on the competition side.
Yeah. And it was this, if I remember correctly, there was one company who was doing the motion rigs for several stands, wasn't it so?
That's correct, and I do not remember their name.
No, I don't either. Yeah, that's interesting. And over to you, Alex. Alex, you're using a direct drive reel, aren't you?
Yeah, Davy, that's true. I've been using the AccuForce wheel from Sim Experience for roughly 3 years now, I would say.
Yeah.
I've gone through a wide range of wheels over my sim racing career, if you can call it that.
Yes.
Starting with very, very cheap wheels with just 180 degrees of range and no force feedback. That is kind of where I started decades ago. Moved over to a Logitech Driving Force Pro, which I used for many, many, many years. I really love that wheel. My first 900-degree wheel with force feedback, and that lasted for about 7 years. Then I upgraded to a Fanatec wheel.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, I jumped onto the direct drive wheel train, and I don't regret it. I think when you spend a lot of hours over the course of a year or even many years with a hobby, it certainly warrants a little bit of investment, depending on what you can. And the direct drive wheel has added another layer to the driving experience. One thing that I like the most about it is that it's absolutely rock solid. The thing that really got on my nerves, even with high quality wheels like the Fanatec wheels, is that you have quite a bit of flex in the whole system. Everything is moving around a little bit. There's a bit of creaking here and there, and it just feels a bit toy-like, if that is a word even.
Yeah, no, that's fair to say.
And the direct drive wheel, right from the first second that you use it, it feels absolutely rock solid, like a wheel in a real car does.
Yeah.
And that alone adds to the experience quite a bit, especially when you're driving in VR and you're just going from the haptics that you get, from the feedback that you actually get in your hands.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome. Another great part is that the force feedback is very smooth and very detailed and very granular. You get all the forces are delivered in a very smooth and fine controlled way, and every little Newton meter or every little movement actually comes into your hands and is not drowning in the belt or the gears or the plastic wheel itself. So you get every little tiny movement of the wheel. That's another awesome thing. And the last thing, obviously, is the force itself that the wheel can put out. So if you want to, you can replicate realistic steering forces of an open wheel car, which I did in the beginning. I had the wheel at not full strength, because that really is overkill, but I had it set to a pretty high amount, and you really start to get in trouble after half an hour of driving an open wheel car. Then if that, because it just takes so much force to hold the wheel steady. So that's kind of interesting. But overall, I don't regret it. It is a very pricey investment and a big decision to go for that.
Yeah.
But since I spent so much time with this hobby, which I would almost call a passion by now, or it's certainly fueled by my passion for cars. We can say it that way. So I think the investment was the right one, and I'm getting a lot of hours of fun out of it, and that's what counts, I think.
Yeah. And Jimmy Broadbent did a video. I think he published it last week. The title was, "Is a direct drive wheel worth it?" And one of the points he made was that his upper arms and his shoulders have kind of developed strength wise because of the so have you found the same?
Yes, most definitely.
Oh, really?
This really is no joke. This is, if you think about it, it is kind of like a workout tool, because you spend, well, let's say at least half an hour a day on it, on average, I'd say, and probably more in most cases.
Yeah.
And it does take, as I said, depending on the car that you drive, it does take a little bit of force to keep the car on the road and the wheel pointed where you want it to point. So I definitely have felt that, that especially the shoulder region. At first, I could really feel my arms after, especially in the first days you drive hours per day because it's a new wheel and it's awesome and you want to try all kinds of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
And my arms were quite tired after a long session. So I really felt that in the beginning, and I felt that actually a little bit of muscle is building up there in these places. So I can confirm that.
And I'm just thinking now, a silly question came to mind. You know, you did a video of the Transfagaran, you know, the highway in Romania. And you do a lot of kind of fun videos. You're kind of drifting and stuff. So if you're doing a video like that where there's a lot of real rotation, do you turn the strength down then?
No, I have it. That's also very interesting, but that kind of goes for all force feedback wheels. I have one setting. I have dialed it in the beginning, and then every car kind of gets a different output in the sim to the wheel. So every car feels a little bit different in terms of the rotation that you need, the wheel lock that you need to get it to turn, how direct it feels, and the forces as well. So there's no need to fine-tune it to every single car or to turn it up or turn it down. You could do that, of course, to enhance the experience even further and say, I want to have a certain profile for open wheel cars because they generally require more force to turn the wheel.
Yes.
Or I want to have a profile for modern cars with power steering and one for cars without power steering. You could do that, but honestly, I didn't feel that it's necessary at all, because even with one setting for all cars, they still have their unique character that they display through the force feedback. And I don't exactly know how the Sims do it, because it's quite amazing, to be honest. And that's another thing. When you drive with a regular wheel, no matter how good the force feedback is, the wheel itself kind of makes it feel unrealistic to a degree. And you have the exact opposite effect with a direct drive wheel, because it is so rock solid. It immediately reminds you of what you feel in a real car. And I don't really know how to put that in the right words, but you kind of immediately get a feeling that this is real when you just lay your hands on the wheel and there's no flex. Especially now I have a real BMW wheel mounted to the EcoForce base, so that helps as well, I think. But it's hard to describe exactly what I mean, but it's kind of, you start from the other viewpoint. You start from this is real, and then you get the force feedback effects. And sometimes they feel a little bit overdone, or sometimes you can feel, okay, this is not quite realistic. This is not what I would feel in a car. When you're driving a regular field, you start from the other viewpoint. You touch the wheel, and you immediately know that this is not real, because you can just feel it by turning the wheel, by flexing it. So I don't know if that comes across what I'm trying to say.
I get what you mean. It's more the direct drive wheel is literally more like driving an actual steering mechanism inside a real car
Exactly.
where you're feeling
Exactly.
directly the road. Yeah.
That's very well said. Yeah, exactly.
And Billy, have you ever tried the direct drive wheel?
Yes,
And what did you
I
think?
have. I can understand why people like them.
Yeah.
To counter Alex's point, I think they all don't feel real. So,
Okay.
To a degree, definitely. Yeah.
yeah, I don't have an issue using uh, a lower, let's say, grade wheel. You'll find most of the competitive guys do not use a lot of force feedback. I find most people use too much force feedback.
Yeah.
But it's all in perception as what the person is using that they think is realistic. And that's what's great. We can tailor things to how we like to perceive the real world.
Yes.
I don't use real heavy force feedback. I care more about the detail. I know that direct drive wheels do a real good job at giving you the detail. I'm pretty happy with my TSPC racer.
Yes.
I don't feel it's any more or less kid-like than a direct drive wheel.
Yeah.
And for me, the wheelbase, the pedals are more important than the wheelbase.
Okay.
The wheelbase is nice. It's, you go from a T150. I started out kind of like Alex. We had a Mad Catz. I only played on consoles for a long time. I didn't have a PC good enough to do any sort of gaming with it. So
Yeah.
I had like the old Mad Catz wheels, and then we went, and I think it was PS2. We went and got in fact, I think I had the same one Alex did. What is it? The Driving Force Pro or GT or whatever it is. And that was okay. I always felt like they were kind of gimmicky. So I went on and off using a wheel. And then I decided when I started getting into, I think it was Forza, I want to say 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Can't remember which one. But I started getting the Fanatic products, and I thought those were a much better step up from what I had previously felt. And I played with those for a while. But I still found that I was faster with a controller. So I kind of was like, I don't know. I was using just a wheel stand, a Fanatic wheel stand at the time. And then I got a PC that I could actually start sim racing with. And so I got another wheel stand. I got the Club Sport V1, and I thought that was a nice step up from even the one before. It was whatever was compatible with the Xbox 360. And then from there, I got frustrated because I wanted something that worked on a console and a PC, because I still enjoyed playing the Forza and Gran Turismo series, and Thrustmaster. I had an issue with a Fanatic product, and so I jumped ship and went to Thrustmaster, and I think it was the TXs that I started with, and I thought that was pretty good. And then I bought a T300 so that I could play on the PS3 and 4.
Yes.
And then after that, I used my T300 for a long time, and just used plug the TX in whenever I was doing anything with Forza.
Yeah.
But Forza kind of fell off the wagon for me, so I didn't use the TX as much. And then I went and when I was working with Inside Sim Racing, Thrustmaster sent me a TSPC racer.
Yes, I remember.
To try.
Yeah.
And since then, I mean, I've tried an AccuForce, and that's the only one I've tried.
Yeah.
But I've also tried a Club Sport 2.5.
Yeah.
And they're great wheels. I mean, they're great wheelbases. They work really well. I can totally understand why people go with the direct drive route.
Yeah.
Because it is a different feeling. And I think it speaks to the level of immersion that the person is looking for.
Yes.
And I think that, for most people, it's considered to be more immersive using a direct drive wheel. Again, I feel like in my experience, most people use too heavy of a force feedback. So on one end, using a direct drive wheel, I think it's actually putting inputs that aren't realistic in my opinion. It caused when you can literally watch people when they have it too high, the car will do things that it shouldn't be doing because it's literally yanking the wheel away from their hands.
Yes.
And while that can happen in a real car, I've had it happen in my real race car. It's not to the degree that is happening that I see when people have those forces turned too high. Same thing goes for a Fanatic or a Thrustmaster, though. If you turn those up too high, you get clipping and you lose all the detail. And like I said, I'll reroute to most of the fast, really alien-like drivers don't typically, not all, I know some do, but majority do not use a direct drive wheel because they don't require what the direct drive wheel is doing in order to be good at their whatever sim or discipline is.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting point. And I guess it's basically to each his own. You spend your money and you go the route you want. And even I think actually Michi Hoyer is using a G29 if I remember correctly. And Georg Gardner, who's been on the show as well from Race Room in Sweden, he's also using a TSPC racer. And I guess you could say, I mean, there's a brand, I think it's Hori, you see them in the stores, it's like really cheap. Correct. Maybe 50, 60, 90 or $100. Those are, dare I say, they're kind of like toys, but once you get
it's kind of like a T150 in my opinion. I mean, T150 isn't bad, especially if you don't have a lot of money to spend. And again, it's all, how much money do you have to spend and what is the level of immersion that you're looking for, not necessarily, like you stated in the beginning, how fast do you want to be. And I hear it every once in a while, hey, this direct drive wheel makes me capable of correcting the car when I shouldn't be able to. Okay. I would say then that's, in my opinion, and it's not a slight against anybody, but if that is your conclusion with a direct drive wheel, I would say you're driving incorrectly.
Okay. That's
I don't think that I don't think that the wheel should be dictating your level of being able to catch the car. You should be able to do that regardless. That's my opinion. And my experience.
I guess for me, and indeed back to the fact that you mentioned you don't use a lot of force feedback, Billy, and I recall you stating that in the past, and indeed I did a tutorial on R Factor 2 recently, and I looked up your streams and indeed William Marsh's streams as well, and I was looking at your settings trying to get a gauge on how you guys were doing it, because I know that you were using a TSPC racer and William was using a direct drive, and even from my familiarity with R Factor 2 setup, I was trying to get a guide on how did the settings compare,
Yeah, I basically in R Factor 2 with the Thrustmaster settings that I have for the TSPC racer, I play with a few things in the control panel, but I leave the strength at 75. I don't put it at 100. Some people will say putting it at 100 allows you to get more of the information. I have not found that to be the case. So factory comes 75. I just leave it at 75. And then I'm anywhere from, 65 to 80, depending on the car. In the actual game. So.
And I think for me, given my experience with Thrustmaster, I have been interested, now it's out of my price range in many ways, but I think I had been interested in a direct drive mechanism simply in one way, from the durability element of it, because you have less to break, and I don't know.
No, you're correct.
I don't know what it was with my initial two T300s. It might have been, for example, let's say if I'm in the settings, you have the in-game settings and you have the Windows controller settings. I'm literally afraid to dial it up too high. I don't run force feedback too high. I mean, if there's a clipping application available in a game, I'm using that. And games like Dirt Rally, and in a way, I'm kind of avoiding, or I'm sort of, it's silly to say, but I'm kind of afraid to play it, because with the sheer work on the wheel, it might actually break the mechanism, and then it's a lot of hassle to look into an RMA and and make sure that the wheel is within warranty. So I think that's one of the elements. I think that's interesting.
I used Dirt Rally with my T300 a lot.
Yeah,
and I never had that. I never had that problem. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just getting a bad batch. I don't know. I don't. There's no good, and it shouldn't be like that.
No,
I mean, there's no
it
excuse.
shouldn't at all.
I'm not trying
Absolutely.
to make excuses
Yeah.
It's just not been my. It's just not been my experience.
Yeah. There's an old saying, "The look of the Irish," but in my case, it's not true. And back to you, Alex. Now, I want to link to it because you have this Simrig link. You have a link to the Simrig videos in all your videos. You actually have the dash of a car in your house, isn't it so?
Yes, that is correct. That was kind of a dream of mine that I had even as a kid back in the 80s.
Yeah.
I thought, oh man, it would be so cool to kind of
get a
very
cool
dash from a car and build your rig into it. Mostly, I don't know why, but I just think it's a cool idea. Part of it is the rig itself. When you just have a space frame here, it just is not very visually pleasing, and having the dash sitting here is just a nice thing to watch at, and it's also a very nice thing to drive in. I have the air conditioning working. It's not cool air, but I have the air vents working, so I have a little bit of air streaming into my face.
That's
when
awesome.
I'm driving in VR, and I can.
I didn't know that yours did that. I saw the other parts. I didn't know that the actual air vents were working.
Yeah, it's
That's
really
rad.
simple. I just have a potentiometer meter that controls some PC fans, some cooling fans.
Yeah.
I believe it was 120 millimeters that I installed into the dash, and no, I love it. It was it is, every project of mine that I've started. I'm always very optimistic in terms of the time frame that I need to finish it.
Yeah.
And when I started it, I thought, oh, maybe it will be 2 or 3 weeks. It ended up being, I think, about 3 months until everything was finished. But I'm super happy with it now, and it's very sturdy and it just works, and I love it. But during the build process, there were quite many frustrating moments in there where you just had to problem solve how to get everything together and working. But no, I love it. It's really awesome.
Yeah. Alex, I'm completely fascinated. So if you don't mind me asking, do you have a background in electronic engineering or something? How were you able to set all this up?
Not at all, no. I have learned in the hotel industry, so I have no official background in that area. I just, I don't know, I think I just inherited that from my father, who always liked to repair stuff and tinker with stuff at home. And I always liked to build things, but I never really found an outlet where I could, make use of that interest until I started to build my own sim rig. And that started actually relatively early. That started 10 years ago, where I just ordered a frame. Well, I didn't really build it myself. I ordered a frame that you had to assemble. Let's put it that way. But that gave me the first taste, because you could modify it a little bit here and there. You could add a bracket here and there for a keyboard or a shifter or anything. So I kind of got a taste for that. And then a few years ago, I started to look on eBay. In the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep for some reason and thought about this again. And
I know the feeling,
fever dreams.
Yeah, exactly. And then I looked for dashes on eBay and saw quite a few options and thought, oh, look at that, $50 for an E36 dash, $80 for an E46 dash, and Mercedes dash, and all kinds of dashes. And I thought, okay, F it, let's go for it. And at 2:30 in the morning, I ordered a bunch of crap that inevitably landed on my doorstep a few days later. And then I started the process, and I learned a lot. There was a lot of soldering and a lot of troubleshooting in general to get everything solid and sturdy in the right place where it needs to be. It sounds relatively easy when you think about it, but it was quite tricky. And
very time consuming, isn't it?
Yes, it was. It was, I think, about 3 months of work in total, off and on, not full time, but quite a few hours per week. I would say 20 to 30 hours per week.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I love it. It looks awesome. You clean it like you clean a regular car. You every now and then you have to get the brush out and get the dust off and all that kind of stuff. And I now have a small. It's not an iPad, but it's one of those Amazon tablets. I believe it was really cheap, like $20.
Yeah.
And I run a SimDash. I don't know if you're aware of that software. SimDash on that, so I have the real data from the sim that I'm actually currently driving on display in the dash, and you can see it in the video. And I think that's a really neat little detail. That was actually really easy to set up for a change, but yeah.
And I don't recall what is the actual dash. What car is the dashboard from, Alex?
It's actually from multiple cars. It's from an E46 BMW, which is the era around, I would say, from 98 to 2006, something like that.
Yeah.
And I chose that one because it's very good size. It's not too large, not too small. I really like the layout. It's a nice and clean and simple and elegant dash, I think.
Yeah.
And I ordered the main dash and then several other components from other vendors on eBay.
So you ordered it from eBay, the dash?
Yeah.
And it came in the post?
Yes, it did. Quite large packages. And
what they did was they put it in a bunch of pieces and you had to glue it all back together.
Yeah, actually, at first I thought about cutting it in half because it is quite wide, but I'm happy that I didn't do that. I still have the glove box there, and I have my Oculus Touch controllers in there and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, it is
it's
from
amazing.
3 different cars.
Absolutely amazing.
316 compact was one, and 320 diesel touring was the center console. And the handbrake and the gear shifter are in the correct position, and that alone is very valuable, especially in VR. I can use the armrest. I have the handbrake right there. I have my hand on the shifter. Everything feels.
And does the handbrake work in the Sims? It does.
Yes, it does. It's a Fanatec Club Sport handbrake.
Okay.
And I have the original BMW cover on that, the suede cover with the M stitching. And
perfect.
Yeah,
so amazing. Nice. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you said, I know that you mentioned this earlier and you've talked about it before on your channel, but you actually have a BMW wheel. So what then about the, like, for example, sequential paddles? If you want to do sequential shifting, what do you do?
I do, yeah, that was the biggest problem that I ran into. I dismantled the original AccuForce wheel. So I completely dismantled that, took off all the switches, took off all the little circuit boards inside, and put all of that into the BMW E46 wheel, including the pedal shifters. And
really?
I even got most of the original switches or buttons to work that are on the original BMW wheel. I installed the AccuForce switches, the press buttons behind there. So yeah, most of that actually works, and I'm using the AccuForce pedal shifters, which I've mounted behind the BMW wheel. Yeah. And that all works perfectly, which really? Is kind of a surprise to me, but I'm taking it.
So did you, I'm sorry, did you buy you bought the AccuForce setup with a wheel for it, because the direct drive motor is separate, isn't it? And then the wheel that you got, you kind of disassembled it basically.
Yes. I used it for about a year before I did that. I just want to mention that because I would not dare to do that on day one. No. But I kind of the direct drive wheel was kind of what enabled me to do this, because I thought a regular wheel would not have enough torque to move the bigger wheel, the real steering wheel, because you have a much larger diameter, and the wheel itself is quite heavy. It's I don't know, maybe 12 pounds or something. It's pretty heavy, even without the airbag inside, which of course
you get that heavier wheel in there, you get all the dampening, you lose everything, all the detail.
So I thought, man, this wheel is so strong. I bet you could even put a real steering wheel on there and it wouldn't even notice. It would just keep on going. And that kind of set the whole process in motion. Yeah. And that was the trickiest part of the whole build, to dismantle. And that was actually a scary day. I still remember that when I first started to take the first screws out of the AccuForce wheel, and my head was okay. I could still go back from here on. It's just 2 screws.
What
and
am I
then,
doing? Kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it got serious, and I
Yeah.
dismantled the first buttons and the circuit boards, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm too deep now. I have to go through with
Yeah.
it. But no, the wheel feels great. I don't know what it is, but it actually made a bigger difference than I thought to have a bigger diameter wheel, because especially in VR, you see everything in front of you in 1-to-1 scale, and you kind of grab your hands and or move your hands towards the steering wheel that you see.
Yeah.
And usually steering wheels are a lot, or sim racing wheels are a lot smaller than the real wheels in at least road going sports cars.
Yeah.
So just moving your hands towards the real wheel and feeling another real wheel of the same dimensions, it was very, very awesome and noticeable actually in VR. I really did not expect that. I thought it would feel good, but it made a bigger difference than I thought, just to change the wheel without changing anything else. And no, I really love it. It's sturdy. It also has never skipped a beat, and every time when I sit down in there and record, I still often smile a little bit, and
Yeah, you
that's
must do.
that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I noticed, I think I've heard reference to, for example, like inside the Thrustmaster wheel, there's like a metal core so that the force feedback can be translated from the motor. And indeed, it's probably the same with the original wheel that came with the AccuForce, and of course, even stronger with a direct drive motor running behind it. But would the core of the actual BMW wheel be the same, so that the vibrations are still kind of fed through the wheel? I guess you haven't lost any of the effects, because the wheel you're using is from a real car, isn't it so?
Exactly. So the way it works is the original AccuForce wheel was mounted to the base through a quick release.
Yes.
It's actually a regular quick release that you would find in race cars, actually, from what I can tell or see. At least it's the same mechanism, the ball bearing mechanism, and you have a few pins in there to transmit data, or in this case, the button touches.
Yeah.
And so that is relatively simple. And after I dismantled it, I just had a regular steering wheel rim, a metal wheel, with some relatively cheap rubber. That was the worst part, or the only bad part actually about the AccuForce wheel, was that the wheel itself felt relatively cheap. In terms of how it was covered, it was not suede or artificial leather. It was hard rubber, and that was not very nice. But anyway, so then I was left with a quick release that I mounted to the original E46 wheel, and then I had to feed all the cables through there and connect all the switches and hot wire everything together and glue it into place and make sure that everything works. And no, it is indeed a metal base inside of the real steering wheel, which is no surprise. So I do not lose any effects. In fact, I know that's probably a placebo effect, but I thought that the weight of the wheel actually helps, so that maybe, in air quotes, unrealistic force feedback effects are a little bit smoothed out, so you don't feel. Hard to describe it, but I thought it had a positive effect on how the cars overall felt. But that just might be placebo, not sure.
Yeah.
But I thought the heavier wheel helped in comparison to the smaller, lighter original wheel.
Yeah, kind of dampening and maybe evening out the effects in a way. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And indeed, the wheel itself would be a higher quality product, dare I say.
Indeed, it is. It is. That was the most expensive single item of the whole build. Was I believe it was 260 euros, the BMW wheel.
Yeah.
And one thing I would like to add, in addition to our discussion earlier about force feedback effects, the bad side of direct drive wheels is that they are the opposite of plug and play. Not in the sense that you need to do a lot of stuff to get them working, but you have to dial them in, because And I completely agree with what has been said about sim racers generally using too much force feedback. In fact, when I started to dial the direct drive wheel in, I did a lot of comparison between my real car, which was an Audi A4 back in that day, and I tried to very consciously steer the car when I was standing still. How much force do I need to actually turn the wheel and while I was driving? And I think that some or most actually modern steerings, especially the electric power steering systems that you have in most modern cars, actually give you less feedback than an average sim would do nowadays.
Yeah. That's a good
You
point.
have to kind of dial down the force feedback effects. But if you really, I spent probably days, if you add it all up, configuring the wheel and trying different effects. You do get these the third-party software called Sim Commander, where you can really detail your force feedback and the effects that you want. You can calibrate everything, and it's very, very, very complex. So you really need to sit down, take an afternoon, maybe 2 afternoons, and dial it in to what you think subjectively feels best. But so that's a very big point. I think that I feel that I need to add that it takes time to dial it in, but when you have a setup that you like, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
And that, in a way, is a segue to a point that I wanted to ask you about, because not only do you have the cost of a direct drive wheel and the cost of some kind of rig to support the sheer weight of it, but like I hear people talking about SimQ software and like William Marsh recently in a video about R Factor 2 was talking about editing INI files for this particular direct drive wheel in this particular software, and I won't say it turns me off, but I like using a wheel on a PC is kind of
I'll say it turns me off.
Yeah, I mean, using a wheel on a PC, even like, dare I say, a gear or a belt-driven wheel, it's complicated enough as it is. And if you go between Project Cars and R Factor 2 and Dirt Rally and Assetto Corsa, they all have their own UIs, their own implementations, but the principles is the same. So, and when you you talked about dialing it in. I mean, how do you go between the complicated software and then the individual, like, do you then have to dial it in for each individual title as well?
Yes, you do. The good thing is, once you have a base profile, you can copy that to another game, start there, and then maybe change the strength of some effects. But the initial dialing in of the first profile, how much vibration from the curbs do you want to feel in the wheel? How much force should there be when you're standing still and trying to turn the tires without them, rolling? How much? Well, it's not really a center spring, but a similar effect. How much of that should there be? And there are quite a few. There's a list of maybe 12 effects that you can add to the wheel in this software. They all have different names, and then you can go into detail with each of those effects and configure the frequency in some cases, the strength, all kinds of stuff. So that takes a while, but I have to say, I'm not usually a guy who likes to do that. I just want to plug things in and want to have fun. But even still, I would go through all of that again to have this result. I think it's something, once you've driven with it for a while, you just don't want to miss it anymore. But on the other hand, and I think that's also a very big point, did I have really less fun with my Driving Force Pro back in the day? Definitely not.
No.
Was I slower? Definitely not. So that's another myth. A direct drive wheel will not make you faster. No. Not at all. In fact, it might do the opposite at first. And it also, I can see that some people dial it up a little so it kind of auto-corrects your drifts or your oversteer situations. But you still need the human hand to fine-tune that, because it would just be like but in real life, the comparison would be just taking your hands off the wheel while you're drifting. That alone will not keep the car on the road. You still have to do something. But a direct drive wheel will not make you faster. And earlier I said maybe overall it's more fun. That's not quite correct. It's more fun to me now.
Yeah.
But you can have just as much fun with a regular 900-degree for speedway wheel, I think.
That's true. Yeah.
It's just a matter of I always aim for the most realistic setting. I always try to replicate what I feel in real life to the highest degree possible. It's kind of a pet peeve, which is why I went for the cockpit. I wanted to have the exact same layout, and I wanted to have a quote-unquote real handbrake, real shifter boot, real shift knob, and all that kind of stuff. I just like that kind of stuff, but you can have just as much fun with a regular wheel.
That's true.
Well, it just, again, it speaks to the level of immersion that you're looking for. And I think that if you want the experience of a direct drive wheel, then you should do it. If you can afford it and you
True.
feel it's going to add to the immersion level, I'm all for it. And I think what you're saying is that it's not necessarily more fun, but you find a greater immersion level using a direct drive setup. And I think that's great. I think that's why I think it's so awesome. We're in a time now where we have so many options between the hardware we can use and the sims that we can run. And it's a lot of options available. We can literally do what we want and get what we want out of it.
Yeah, that's true. It's a whole different ball game in comparison to just a few years ago. And one last little anecdote about direct drive wheels. Why I got interested in them in the first place, I watched a documentary about the Ferrari F1 simulator. That might have been 10 years ago. And I saw them describe that simulator, the hardware that they're using. And the guy said, yeah, this is a direct drive wheel, and it can put out so much force. It replicates the steering forces 1-to-1. And I Googled that, and I immediately knew I just have to have one of those eventually, if it's at least somewhat affordable. And I read about them, and at that point, they were like $25K and for commercial applications only. So I closed that topic quickly back then. But I always kept an eye on the market, and as soon as I saw the AccuForce, I thought, okay, now's the time to jump on there.
And we talked about this we talked about screens in VR when William Marsh was on. Alex, you have a 1080p projector, isn't it so?
Actually, a 4K projector.
That's right. Sorry, I recall now.
Yeah.
So you don't have a monitor in front of the dashboard, so you don't? Or
No, I don't. I almost exclusively race in VR.
Yes,
these
that's what I was going to ask you.
With some exceptions. Forza, unfortunately, doesn't support it, and I use that from time to time.
No.
BeamNG is something else that I've spent a little bit of time with in the past weeks.
Yeah.
And that also does not support VR and probably won't for a while.
No.
But I can totally see why people are skeptical about VR in its current form. There are quite a few drawbacks. However, I feel that the sensation of actually sitting in a full-sized car, of actually sitting in a freaking Ferrari F40 and being able to look around and take in all the details is just so good, even with the relatively low resolution and all the other stuff. But I just couldn't go back to racing in 2D. But again, I understand that people are skeptical about it. But for me personally, you might already have guessed it, but immersion is kind of my thing. So virtual reality works perfectly with the wheel and the rig, and I would not go back.
Yeah. And I've seen that comment many times, like people asking on Reddit, is VR worth it? And people go, well, I bought a VR and I sold my triple screens and I wouldn't go back, and so on. And indeed, you've kind of suggested the same when using a direct drive wheel. But is it fair to say that when you have the VR headset on, you kind of don't see the dashboard of the car, I mean,
Absolutely not. Yeah, yeah. That's what got quite a few people confused, and I can see that as well.
Yeah,
They say, "Oh man,
yeah.
why are you building this beautiful dash when you're just driving in VR?" But it's more about the haptics than the visuals in
Yes.
this case. It's
Yeah.
about having the armrest,
Yes.
having the
Yeah.
handbrake where I intuitively know it should be. Same with the shifter. Having a center console to kind of rest your leg against what I automatically do in a car. So you kind of feel at home more easily. And especially in VR, it was kind of tricky to get comfortable in a cockpit. In the cockpit I had before, which was, well, not bad, but it was just a metal frame, so to speak. And
Yeah.
yeah, hard to describe, but it does add a lot even when you are wearing a VR headset.
Yeah. And even maybe it's just down to the fact that you know that it's there and it's something that you wanted to have. And I guess in a way for you,
Yeah.
the visual model, be it a two-dimensional screen or VR, that's separate from having the dash there. I mean, you've bought the dash as second-hand parts and you've kind of assembled everything together. That was a project you did, and then VR came along and you had to have that as well. So they go together,
Yeah.
but they're kind of separate
Yeah.
concepts, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They work well together, and I would not want to miss either of them. But again, I can see that some people say no. I still prefer triple screens. The refresh rate alone, I can drive at 120 hertz, maybe, probably not with a triple screen, but at a higher refresh rate, I get more detail from the sim or whatever. I get that, but for me, the first time when I first tried the Oculus DK1 back, I don't know, oh God, when was that? 5 years ago, maybe 4
Something
years
like
ago.
that, yeah, 20.
I
2013,
was
yeah.
immediately blown away, and back then I think it was Live for Speed that supported it very early on, and I thought, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I need this. I want this. It just felt immediately right,
Yeah.
and I'm very curious to see how the second gen headsets will develop and how they turn out, and I'm having big hopes for the future of VR. But at the same time, I would have hoped that it would be a little bit further along in 2018. Would you have asked me a few years ago where will be VR in 2018, I would have made a much more optimistic guess than where it actually is right now.
Yeah. And what happened, like with Palmer Luck, he's not. I don't think he's really that involved that much with Oculus, and I guess the HTC Vive Pro was not what people expected. It was, I guess, people were expecting perhaps more of a quantum leap, but it's also down to processing power and whatever Nvidia and AMD are making available. So
yeah, it's a dance on a tightrope right now. You can't
Yeah.
push the hardware too far too quickly because the GPUs have to keep up. On the other hand, software developments like foveated rendering, for example, go into a direction where VR actually will not be that hardware expensive, or at least not more than traditional 2D gaming. When you have tracked eye movements, for example, and you can see where the player is focusing on it, you push all the pixel and all the quality in that spot, and the surrounding areas that are sort of in your periphery get kind of downgraded without you actually noticing it. So there are quite a few tricks that you can do to reduce the hardware needs of virtual reality. But that's kind of in the process right now of coming to fruition. We are not quite there yet. But yeah, as an early adopter, I'm quite happy with my headset and I use it a lot. But after a few years of using it, now I'm also quite stoked to get my hands onto something new whenever that might appear on the market.
And Billy, you're using a single widescreen aspect ratio monitor, wasn't it so?
Yes,
Yeah. And have you ever tried the VR?
I have.
What did you think?
I have an unpopular opinion about it.
Go on.
Again, I don't. I think that people, when they get into it, I think it's great.
Yeah.
If you like VR, cool. Because I can understand. I think where VR helps is when a person, whether they're new or seasoned, has problems translating the information on a 2D screen to 3D in their brain. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I think that's where that comes into play. I think for a
Yes.
new person, especially, it's easier for somebody that doesn't do like sim driving or sim racing and put on a VR headset and they instantly get it because I think it's more familiar to them. I'm kind of on the other end where I'm like, I never feel like I'm actually sitting in a car. I'm like, yeah, pardon me. I can see in 3D, but I don't have any of the forces happening.
Yeah.
So that immediately takes me out of the experience because having raced, I know what it's supposed to feel like. So it's just like the direct drive thing. Like I get it from an immersive level. I totally understand why people like it.
Yeah.
I don't feel that it's quote unquote any more realistic or it makes me feel like I'm driving a car because I know I'm not. So it doesn't trick my brain into thinking. So I think it's after the initial shock and awe of it all. Like I did one where the first thing I tried was like some dinosaur thing. And I was like, holy crap, like look at the size. And initially it's impressive. But then I'm like, but I can't really see all that well. And my glasses, I wear glasses and my glasses are kind of in the way. And I'm like, this is kind of annoying. And then it gets hot and I'm like, this doesn't feel very good.
Yeah.
And then like after that kind of initial impression wears off, I kind of went, I don't know if this is for me. Like it's interesting, but I would never, I see people not saying that everybody does this. I know they don't, but I see some people like crank their head to the left and crank their head to the right and get up or move around in a car. And I'm like, look, if you were racing, unless you're racing an old school car, like an old Formula car or something like that, the seats we have now in the modern day car and the head and neck restraint devices that we use can't turn your head that far. It doesn't happen.
No.
So, and plus when I look through that, when I had that headset on, I still don't feel like I'm wearing a helmet because the helmet restricts your vision more. So I kind of fallen again, I think part of it is to my detriment. I've raced before. So some of these things don't impress me as much as it would other people. And again, I can totally understand why they do because take my somewhat jaded, I guess, perspective out of it. It is really impressive. It is really amazing that you can put this thing on and you can see in a 3D environment. You can look into the apex and all that. So I get it. I also understand why people run triples. I think if you're competitive in the sim racing space, I think triples make complete sense. But I do not find them more immersive than me running my ultra wide.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoy running my ultra wide. It gives me almost the perspective range that I would be able to look in a modern day race car.
Yeah.
So I don't have the issue that maybe a standard 16:9, 1920 by 1080 aspect would give you in a single monitor. I think if you're running that, I think VR makes sense. I think if you're space limited, I think VR makes sense. Because if you start getting into better refresh rates and stuff like that with your monitors, you can kind of go, well, I can spend this much on a monitor or triple monitors, or I can buy VR and I don't have a lot of space. I think VR makes.
Yeah.
So I think there's really a lot of pros to VR. Just in my environment, it's not necessary.
Yeah. And based on your experience, like you said. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not that I'm trying to like
poo
on everything and say, VR
all.
sucks. It doesn't suck.
No.
It doesn't suck. It's just not. I'm really intrigued. Like Alex said, I'm really intrigued where the next generation of it goes. Because I kind of do this thing where like we fought for so long to have such a nice visual fidelity in our monitors. And then we put the VR headset on and then I can't see,
That's a good point.
And I'm like, like it bothers me to that degree because I'm like, we fought for so long to have such nice visuals and now we've gone backwards with this.
Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued to see where the visuals are for the true next generation, if they even get to that point.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so if the visuals get upgraded, I will be more likely to jump into VR, because that's really my biggest hang up.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting that you made that point that now, just thinking of what you've said, like I've heard that a lot. Yeah, it allows you to see into an apex. I think it was Paul Coleman, the designer of Dirt Rally, when they added VR to Dirt Rally. It allows you to see into the apex of a corner, and I've heard many people say that. But you said something interesting, Billy, that for somebody who doesn't sim race or who doesn't actively game, they put on the VR headset and it's like then they get it. That's an interesting aspect, actually. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I think you'll find that most people, at least the people that I've talked to that don't have a lot of experience,
Yeah.
or perhaps struggle with translating, we're all, how do I say this? We all experience things just a little different. Like some people can tell if their frame rate drops below 144, right? I can't.
Yeah.
I cannot tell the difference. I can't tell the difference till it drops below about 80. And that's just because of how my brain is processing what's going on. Some people can. I think some people are more sensitive to that higher frame rate. I think that's just how we're wired. I also think that some people have a very hard time interpreting a 3D environment on a 2D screen, then to translate that back into a 3D environment into their brain.
Yes.
I think it just takes them a little longer process. So they're not, it just never quite clicks. And I think that somebody like that, or somebody brand new, puts on a VR headset, in my experience with the people that I've talked to, then they instantly get it. They understand more, and they can find the apex better. They're not missing their lines. So for like a really experienced guy that's running in triples, like an Alien or even just a quick sim racer, I don't think it's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
I don't think putting on a VR headset is going to make a difference. But I think if you're struggling, or if I think you're new and you just feel like it's not clicking.
Yeah.
I think VR actually will help you get better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And is it a 21:9 screen you have, Billy? Is it? Yeah.
Yes, I have the BenQ. What is it? The XR3501.
And the refresh rate, what's the native
great.
refresh rate on that then? Is it's more than 60?
It's 144.
144.
It's 100.
Wow, yeah. And I guess you need a relatively high GPU to run that. Is it a 1070 you have, or what is it?
Yeah, I have a 1070 and it runs it just fine. It runs it perfect. I can really crank things up.
Sounds like a good kind of it's interesting. It sounds like a good median setup, because you said that like you said with the 21:9, the widescreen, you as far as you're concerned, it's like what you would see from the seat of a real race car. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, if you've got your field of view set correctly, it's pretty close. Like I can see, I can see earlier into a corner.
Yeah.
So it kind of bridges the gap, because putting triples on is like, I don't know if I really need to go that far with triples. And, I was trying to figure out like the refresh rate, like what am I actually going to be able to use? And I just kind of landed on that monitor going, what's funny is I actually had an ultra wide before that. It was a Dell that was capped at 60.
Yes.
And it was a much cheaper monitor. Yeah. So then it kind of clued me into, I really like this, but I want the response rate is only like 1 or 2 milliseconds in it. So it's a really nice monitor, and I paid quite a bit for it, but I felt that outweighed. That kind of outweighed me getting triples, because I really didn't really have room to put triples. I didn't have a monitor stand at the time that I was happy with to put triples on. No. So this was kind of like my bridging of the gap between all scenarios available.
Yeah. Yeah. And indeed, you talked about like a 1080p 16:9. That's what I have, and it's 60 hertz max. But and then I use this track IR thing, which many people discredit, but it's okay for me. Like I just work like it's for many of us. You work with what you have, and Billy,
Yeah.
I think that like you said earlier when you started to answer the question, the unpopular view. The unpopular view. I don't see it that way, and that's why this show is called Perspectives, because it's everybody's angle is relevant, you know, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. And in a way, that's how I want it to be. So if somebody talks about something and then the other guy says, that's a load of nonsense, that's how it should be, you know, because for everybody it's different. Alex has his setup, and indeed he's very passionate about his gear, and you the same, and you're coming from the real world of racing, sorry. And then so it's, you know, each to his own. So I'm on the kind of the median end, and indeed coming back to space and setups, and it's the final point, if I may, and it kind of segues into that. And one of the notes I had was about rigs. So for example, setups and simple versus complex. So for many of us, we'd have a PC or a console, Xbox or PlayStation, and then we'd have a TV or a monitor and maybe just an office chair. And some people get this one of those foldable chairs from IKEA and so on. And
Sure.
I have my...
That's what I did for a long time. That's what I did.
Yeah. And then I have this Wheel Stand Pro, which I think is made in Europe actually. And then when I was in when I was on vacation during the summer, I was in Vienna actually. I was in a electronics store in Vienna, and I saw one of the race room rigs. Actually, I hadn't actually seen one before. And then there's RC. So there seems to be many different types of prices and setups that you can get. And then, for example, and the final note I have is like, what kind of rig is needed for a direct drive wheel due to the weight? I mean, Alex, you have I gather your setup is based on a series of aluminium pieces that are kind of bolted together because the dash is heavy.
Correct.
And indeed, as is the Acquiforce, and it comes down to different choices because, and if I remember, Jimmy Broadbent did a kind of a small tour of his sim racing shed, as he calls it, and he has basically like a aluminium kind of frame to hold the weight of the wheel. And I guess
what is that, the 80-20?
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah.
And I guess there are as many kind of setup options, there are many like physical rig options as there are setup options. And indeed, every other day on Reddit, you see people posting their setups and people going, "Oh, your wheel is too far from the TV," or "That's the wrong TV," or some people have triples and some people have TVs and single monitors. So, and I guess like we started with the kind of the going from the gear driven to belt driven and then to direct drive, and indeed I think that the ranges of rigs is kind of the breadth of the selection of rigs is kind of as wide, even wider, because I basically have a desk and I have a Wheel Stand Pro. And what I did was actually I made, would you believe, I made these kind of, there's a desk and there's a kind of a gap in the middle of it, and I have these pieces of cardboard that I kind of created. And when I slide in the Wheel Stand Pro, if I want to race, I slide in the Wheel Stand Pro, and I use these kind of blocks I made to kind of wedge it so that it doesn't move around, you know. Whereas other people, I guess, and then I guess Billy, you have a kind of a permanent location where you race. So what kind of rig or what kind of setup do you have?
I use the GT Omega, the ART rig. But then I had their monitor stand for a while. Yeah. But because of the direct drive and not direct drive, primary, the wheels that I was using, it would tend to shake the monitor.
Yes.
Because all the vibration from even though I wouldn't feel any flex in what I was using, all the vibration got translated into the monitor and it would drive me nuts. So I got a monitor stand separately
Okay.
from the rig itself. So it's a Ricmotech, their monitor stand that I got. Yeah, I mean it works great. I've heard people put a direct drive wheel on it and they say it's fine. I myself have not tried that, so I don't know, but I don't notice anything, weird with it.
Yeah.
It works pretty good. And I get asked to make a video on this, and someday I will, but I always tell people when they start there, we can argue over something being correct, but I can't argue something that you're feeling. So, in other words, if somebody's going to ask me what to do to set up, I'm going to tell you to put your monitor as close to the wheelbase as you possibly can. Use the correct field of view within, 10-ish degrees. There's a correct eye height to have to your in relation to where your monitor is. So if we're talking like things being correct, then that. But if somebody likes to race in their living room, 5 feet from their TV, I can't tell them that they're wrong.
No, that's true.
Because that's how they feel. They're just enjoying what they're doing.
Exactly. And it's all about having fun, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But if you're going to ask me, hey, what should I do to get the most immersive or get the most out of my experience, I'm going to tell you, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And you need to get, this goes back to equipment that we were talking about earlier. Get used to your equipment. Figure out the settings within the sim that are available to you to get the most out of what you're doing. In other words, if there's a brake sensitivity, if there's a throttle sensitivity, whatever, people make the mistake of, well, the 100 is what the realistic. And I'm like, but we're not all using the same equipment. So that doesn't work.
Yeah.
We're not all using the same equipment. So if everybody's using the same stuff, then yes, you could say that 100% is what it's supposed to be. But if 100% is, they tested on a G27, and then you come in with a direct drive wheel, or or the opposite, maybe they tested with a direct drive wheel and you've got a G27, like, don't be afraid to move those sliders around. They're in there for a reason.
That's true. Yeah.
So yeah, people get caught up on, 100% supposed to be the most realistic. And I'm like, well, maybe in a certain scenario, yes. Maybe in the scenario that they tested, but we all don't run the same equipment.
No.
So don't get hung up on that stuff. Just adjust it to where you feel it's no different than buying a rig or using a wheel stand or, like I did, a folding chair. It doesn't matter.
No.
You just figure out what works for you and then just do it. Just
with
have
the
fun.
time and the space that you have. Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, my rig isn't super complicated. I don't have anything super fancy on there.
Yeah.
It's just, but it serves the purpose. One of the reasons I got it, because it came with you could get casters for it. So if I do need to move it, I can. So I like
that's
that.
A good point. Yeah. That's a good one. Alex, is it a real car seat you have in your rig?
Yes, I had that actually long before I had the dash set up.
Yeah.
I had that seat for, I think, about 12 years now.
Yeah.
And before that, I've usually raced in very uncomfortable positions. I did the IKEA chair with a wobbly desk and everything was shaking all that kind of stuff, especially back in the day with the heavy 19-inch monitors, the CRT monitors. Everything was a little bit, it was different. But I completely agree that you don't really need a fancy rig to have fun. Just use what you have.
Yeah.
Use the space that you have as well as you can.
Yeah.
And I also completely agree with a good force feedback setup. I think a lot is left on the road, so to speak, by not experimenting a little bit with the settings and trying to find a better profile that fits your needs. I think that's a very important thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I've used the expression before. I think there are as many setups as there are snowflakes, kind of a thing. It's kind of like each to his own. And Alex, I meant to ask you, and then I somehow forgot. In the dash, you have the real gear stick in the dash of the car. What's below that? Your H pattern shifter. How does that work?
Yes, that's a TSWH shifter is what it's called.
Okay.
It's quite a pricey shifter. I think it was about 400 euros, which is quite a lot.
Okay.
I went for that one because I went through, I think, about 5 or 6 shifters before that. They all broke in various forms and fashions over the
Oh,
years
really?
of use. Yeah, the last one before that was a Fanatec 8 shifter,
Yeah.
which felt great. But again, after a while, it just started to produce bugs more often than not. And
Yeah.
if there's one thing that I really don't like is sitting down, trying to enjoy a nice drive, and you get another bug that you have to solve, or that you try to solve for about an hour until you give up and drive without a shifter.
Yeah.
So I really like reliability and sturdiness in my sim racing hardware.
Yeah.
And yeah, the TSWH shifter, I'm using that one for a bit longer than I have the direct drive wheel, I would say.
Yeah.
So maybe 4 years, a bit over 3 years,
Yeah.
and it absolutely is rock solid. Has never skipped a single beat. It's really good. It feels pretty damn good. I think the Fanatec shifter was a little bit better in stock form in terms of how it feels.
Yeah.
I think for some reason it must be really tricky to replicate the way a real car shifter feels without
is.
having a gearbox attached to it, because
Yeah,
it's
every
very
single
difficult.
shifter that I've used for sim racing feels okay-ish, but it's nowhere near close to what you feel in a real car. So, and I trust these people that engineer that stuff, that they are really smart and they've tried quite a few options. So it just has to be relatively difficult to get that haptic right. But the TSW shifter that I'm using right now is doing a solid job. It works all the time, and I've modded it a little bit to give a little bit more resistance to the movement,
Okay.
with a few extra springs. But no, I'm really happy with it. I think I in real cars as well, I do prefer manual shifter to an automatic.
Yeah.
I always do. So I just like shifting gears manually,
Yeah.
and having an H shifter certainly adds to the sim racing experience.
Yeah. And the TSW, Alex, who's that made by then? Is it some kind of specialist item or?
I can Google it quite quickly
Yeah.
here. Give me a second.
Yeah. But it was expensive anyway, so.
It
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Yes, it was. I remember
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I hope that thing doesn't break as well after a
Yeah.
few months.
Yeah.
TSW Speed Shifter, $410. It's made by thomassuperwheel.com.
Yeah.
Whoever that is.
Whoever he is, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Tom.
But
Tom
all
is
I
a
can
nice
say is
shifter, yeah.
he does a solid shifter. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
We've
guess.
spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't
Go on,
want to
Billy, go
interrupt,
ahead,
but
go ahead.
we've spent a lot of time on the wheelbases. What pedals are you guys running?
In my case, Fanatec Clubsport pedals version 3 inverted. So they're not all standing up, but I mostly drive road cars. I usually prefer road cars over race cars, so that's why I chose those. And the brake especially, so awesome. I think the brake pedal, that's again something that when you have a really good brake pedal, you then realize how quote unquote bad the other ones were that you drove before.
Yes. I'm
Most
sure.
pedals nowadays offer a load cell for the brakes, so most of them are very, very good. But yeah, this one does have a load cell as well and feels really good. I've often think or thought over the years. I think is there a chance that we will see force feedback in pedals or maybe even shifters someday in the future? Because I think there's a point to be made for that, especially in the brake when it starts to fade, or how much travel you have in a certain car. Maybe you could replicate that somehow. I would like to have a bit more or to have a closer connection to the car that I'm driving in the sim.
Yeah.
So right now, every car feels the same in terms of the pedal feedback. But
That's a
as
good
you all
point,
know,
yeah.
there's a huge difference or a huge range when you drive real cars, when it comes to how the pedals feel. I mean, gas pedal is not as important, but clutch and brake, I think it would be kind of cool to have that little bit dynamic.
Yeah.
But yeah, unfortunately, we're not there yet. But the Fanatec
No.
pedals, they are really, really good.
Yeah, that's what I've heard so far. I'm running the T3 PA set that came with the T300, and I have the mod, the mod that came in the box added. It actually took me ages to figure out the calibration of the pedal. So when every time I connect the bass to the PC, I have to kind of calibrate the pedal using the controller, because with the mod behind the pedal, the travel of the pedal is so much shorter. So I have to make sure that the controller software is correctly detecting the depression on the pedal, because with this it's this conical brake mod thingy. So basically all it does is technically it just reduces the travel on the pedal, so you have to press harder to get the pedal to run to 100% basically. So
yeah.
And how about you?
I used that for a while.
Yeah. And what pedals are you running, Billy, then?
I'm running the Fanatic V3Is.
Okay.
So the inverted version 3.
Yeah.
I've tried, obviously if you started way back in the day, the pedals came with the wheelbase, and those were just, kind of whatever. And then when I got my Forza set up, I bought the CSL Elite and then got the inversion kit.
Yeah.
I don't know if it came out right away or later, but I ended up getting the inversion kit. I thought those were great.
Yeah.
Those are actually still to this day. I know you can't find or buy them from Fanatic anymore, but those were a great pedal. Load cell, has a nice brake feel to it.
Yeah.
Really just, I think, a nice set of pedals. And then when I bought the Thrustmaster stuff, it came, the deal that I got came with the one that you have, Davy, that's got the brake mod in it. And actually, really, for the price of those pedals, they're actually pretty good. The conical brake mod gives you a progressive feel, while it may not be a load cell.
No.
It does a nice job bridging the gap between a standard potentiometer pedal.
Yeah.
I think they actually, if you can tune them right, they're actually a pretty good pedal.
Yeah.
They work well.
Yeah.
I don't know. I ran those for quite a while, and then I decided that I wanted to try something different. So I got a Ricmotech set of pedals, the Pro. I think they were GT1s or something like that.
Yeah.
And those were a hydraulic brake. And while I found I really, really liked the throttle pedal on that one. Out of all the throttle pedals that I've ever tried, that Ricmotech one, best one I've ever run.
Yeah.
It just felt right. The brake, however, it was supposed to be more realistic, but what I ended up finding was I had a very, very hard time getting adjusted to it. And what was supposed to feel real actually confused my brain. It messed with me. It required such a short travel to play with that it messed me up. And while I was a little faster with the pedals than the Thrustmaster pedals, I mean, I was faster. I think that if you want to talk about gaining speed, I think pedals are what actually will gain you some speed.
You reckon?
Because the brake is, to me, if you're going to point to the most important thing on your setup, it's the brake.
Yeah.
And how well you can adapt to the brake setting. So if you're running a set of G27 pedals and you got your brake down pat, then you don't need a better set of pedals. But if you're struggling, like I was, I was struggling with the braking because my race car days and stuff my brain kind of goes, you're supposed to be feeling X and you're not getting that feedback. So now you've got to kind of get adjusted to something, and constantly your brain goes, I see a race car, I see a screen, I see these things in front of me, and I'm supposed to be doing this accurately, but it's just not clicking. So I went through several different pedals. So the Ricmotech, while they were really nice, the brake just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I found that it just over time I got frustrated. So during the sale that they had, the Black Friday sale, I think the V3Is from Fanatic went on sale. I had actually take that back. Before that, I had actually put my CSL Elites back on my rig.
Yeah.
And was quicker than the Ricmotech set.
Oh, really?
So I was like, okay, I really like the brake force on this. I like how it's going. And then the V3Is went on sale. I was like, I really like those pedals and I really like that whole elastomer thing. So I got the elastomer kit that you purchase separate from it. It's an add-on.
Yeah.
And between that, finding the right combination of elastomers to put in there, I absolutely love the brake feel.
Yeah.
In this set of pedals. I am much quicker again. And it's not it just gives you the to Alex's point, making kind of everything feel the same. Yes, it kind of does. But for me, it helps me adapt quicker. So having the brake feel the same, it makes it quicker. Like I was very particular in race cars with the brake feel. Like I wanted a certain feeling out of the brakes. So I made adjustments in the car to make the brake try to feel as close as I wanted it to.
Yeah.
Same thing with the throw of the throttle pedal. Like I even in the sprint car, because you kind of sit upright, I actually turned my throttle pedal sideways a little bit.
Yeah.
For your natural, the natural curve of your foot.
Yeah.
So your foot doesn't tend to naturally point straight out. It kind of, mine kind of tips to the side just a little bit. So I turned my throttle pedal to do that. So, these are things you can do in a race car. And I feel like you can do the same thing with your sim racing setup. Having the brake feel for me, do what I want it to do every time. Even though the car may react different, I know where I'm at all times with that brake feel. Yeah. So I really enjoy those pedals a lot.
And both of you guys mentioned the inversions. Forgive my ignorance here, but if I remember correctly, the Thrustmaster T500 came with these, or you could get them with the T3PA Pro, this kind of big set of pedals with this kind of stainless steel back, and you could set it so that that you could invert the pedals so the pedal mechanism looked like it is in a real car, isn't it so? Rather than the pedal mechanism being below the pedal, it's kind of above it. So is that what you mean in terms of the being inverted?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I had the T3PAs.
Yeah,
I had the T3PAs inverted. I got that Pro Edition, and I had those inverted as well. I just prefer the inverted feel for the brake a little better, even though I know Formula cars will use it mounted to the floorboard. Even karts, even my sprint car. Well, no, actually, my sprint car, it's not like that. So it's a very odd setup for my brake pedal in the sprint car. It's neither inverted nor bolted to the floorboard. So it's a very odd thing. Yeah. But yeah, like GT cars, I've been in stuff, those typically will be inverted, or like, you look at a stock car, like a NASCAR truck or whatever, those are inverted as well. Yeah. I just like the feel of those. Yeah. They just, I don't know, make sense to me more.
Yeah. And now that I'm thinking of it, the pedals and then the wheel, how important then is your seating position now? Of course, it comes back to each to his own, but in terms of your seating, I mean, I have an office chair that I got there, I say as cheap as possible, and it has the ability to kind of, I can set it so that it can kind of lean back, so in my head I'm kind of in a driving position, so to speak. I mean, it's not the same as being in a real car or being in an R seat or a GT Omega cockpit or even in a race room seat. So how is it, and you've driven real cars, like sprint cars, like you've talked about many times, Billy, how important is the seating position? And also, I guess, like, you can adjust your field of view in the car, and of course, and I mean, even if you're sitting in a standard chair, you can adjust your field of view accordingly. But I guess what I'm trying to get at, in relation to the feel for the pedals, where your feet and your legs are, how important is how important is it to should you be sitting as low and as kind of slung back as possible, or what do you guys think, or is it a silly question?
Well, I just think to Alex's point earlier, I think it goes to, what kind of immersion level are you looking for?
Yeah.
And then I would say on top of that, do whatever's comfortable.
Yeah.
Don't feel yourself the need to be confined because, oh, a Formula guy drives like this, so I have to, I have to be completely laid down with my feet, that are going to be approximately midway up my chest,
Yeah.
strung out way in front of me.
Yeah.
I've run everything from, a cart, which you're kind of stretched out. For me, I'm stretched out in a cart, kind of laid back, and then in a sprint car, you really, it's like you're sitting in a chair. You really sit close to upright in one of those things.
Yeah.
And then a GT car, you're kind of in between, where you kind of sit up a little bit and your feet are out a little ways, but not, you're not really stretched out. But again, if you're talking about a race car, they want to get you as low as they can.
Yes.
They're really concerned about center of gravity. So
yeah.
I just say, if you're looking for that immersion level, which is kind of what I do, I kind of put myself in like a GT position. So where my hands just barely don't block my field of view when it gets to the top of the wheel.
Yeah.
And then, cause I kind of find like in a regular, let's say GT car, that's kind of where you're at, or even my cart. Well, my cart, I can't see actually over my hands, so never mind.
Yeah.
But that's kind of where I'm at. And I like when I'm in that position with the seat lean back just a hair.
Yeah.
I like where my leg is at and my foot for the pressure that I can put on the pedals. So
yeah.
I think you just find a balance.
And I guess we all have our own setups, and indeed we all drive so many different types of cars virtually, like GT cars and open wheel, and even, for example, in Automobilista you can drive trucks and everything, and of course the view in the truck is completely different to a Formula 1 car. So
I think what's also important in terms of how to sit is what not to do. For a very long time, I used a chair that was quite movable. It was not exactly on wheels, but it was moving around on the floor a lot. And I used that for such a long time. And only when I moved to something that's a bit more sturdy, I realized how bad that arrangement actually was. But you kind of get used to it after a few days or weeks of driving with it, and then you live with it. But that was a big step back then, when I thought, man, you really have to find a comfortable position to drive, because it's more fun to focus on the driving than to keep your seat and the wheel in relation. And so that was noticeable to me back then.
And I actually have to admit, I have an office chair and I put masking tape on the wheels so the wheels don't rotate. So basically, when I slide the chair up, when I slide the chair up against the Wheel Stand Pro and lean the chair back, the seat doesn't move. But although I have to admit, it's been a bit squeaky of late, so I have to put some WD-40 on it to take out the squeaking. So we've been running a long time. Guys, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, Billy, for joining, and Alex as well, of course. And I think if in a closing point, if I will, I think if you get the gear that you want, and you dream of driving a McLaren F1 or a Ferrari 250 GTO, and maybe you're driving a Ferrari 250 GTO in the hills of California, whether you're on Forza or iRacing, or whether you're driving direct drive or just a simple second-hand gear-driven wheel. If you're there and in that moment, it puts a smile on your face. That's what you want, And I think
exactly.
That's what you're aiming for. And it comes back to a point that you made, Billy. You find what you're comfortable with and go with that. So is there anything coming up on your guys' channel that you want to promote, or any series, or something that you're working on?
Nothing special in my case, just the usual content. Of course, yeah, that means sim racing, a little bit of Star Citizen, a little bit of variety. But yeah, nothing too special comes to mind right now.
Yeah. And how
Yeah, I
about you?
don't have anything.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I have plans. I obviously have things I want to do, but then if I announce one of those and then I don't do it, then it always backfires on me. Something will happen and then I can't do it.
Yeah.
But just a typical, for me, I just highlight things that I enjoy that people may or may not have run. Usually that's what I try to do. And then if something new comes out or something I feel that's worthy of a live stream, then I'll do a live stream.
Yeah.
I am working on a few podcasts. I just got to get those finalized and done. So yeah, just, nothing out of the ordinary for me, but I've got stuff coming.
Yeah. Yeah, you've been, and both of you have been putting out a lot of content. And for example, you did the endurance pack for R Factor 2, Billy, and I admire it because I find it difficult to kind of sit down and find the time, or often for me, I find something where I realize, oh, well, this hasn't been approached before, so I'll kind of try and do that, so each to his own. And you guys you have your own spin on things, and you're making very interesting content, I have to say, and I really enjoy the stuff you guys are doing because it's very different. And indeed, the gear you're using behind it is different as well. So I guess that's comes back to the point of this whole conversation today. So
yes, well, thank you.
So guys, thank you very much for joining. We would appreciate any comments or questions in the comment section below, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy this episode. This podcast episode will be available on the iTunes Store and Google Play, on Stitcher Radio, and also in RSS format if you want to add it manually to your favorite podcast player. And any relevant links and so to Alex's channel and to Billy's channel will be included in the description below. So until next time, thank you.